This podcast is part of the Podcast Arcade Network.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Paranormal Dads. I'm your co-host Pat.
I'm Eddie.
And I'm Andy.
Join us as we look for the world's monsters, myths, and mysteries on episode 8 of Paranormal Dads. And welcome. We are back.
Episode 8 and feeling great.
That's right.
I'm going to rhyme everything.
It has been a long time in the making.
It has been. Has it been a month?
It's been a month.
Well,
Since we recorded.
Life
certainly.
gets busy. You
Man.
know, what do you do?
I hate it when the saying is life gets in the way, because it seems like it's a bothersome thing,
Yeah.
and it doesn't get in the way. It's just something that happens, and it's
Well,
life.
the reality is we're paranormal enthusiasts second, but we're dads 1st.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we got kids and activities. We have husbandly duties and honeydew lists that we need to take care of first. So sometimes that takes precedence.
Between the three of us, we're dealing with 12 different schedules that we have to make everybody work.
Is that how many we have?
We've got
the three of us?
12. I mean,
dozen of
between us, our wives, and our kids, there's 12 people that we have to get the schedules right, that the three of us can sit down here together and knock these things out.
And I used to be Mormon, so I have a whole other family that you guys don't even know about.
And then you factor in pets who poop on the floor, right?
Exactly.
You got that stress.
So many agendas.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, we're back, and this 8 is going to be great.
Yes.
And as always, we start off every show with recent sightings.
Oh my. Recent sightings. I'm excited. So, for a long time, I have wanted to do this. I'm going to leave it as vague as I can to keep people wondering what the heck is going on. I wanted to do this particular thing for years and never really had the chance to do it. Didn't know that Omaha had it available, and so just kind of didn't really look into it. And once again, like we said in our initial intro segment, we're busy guys. So I turned 40 recently, and it was a classic like treat yourself thing, and I'm like, I want to see if this is a thing in town, and sure enough, it is, and I did it. What is it? I floated. And to explain to anybody what floating is, it is where you go into essentially a large bathtub is probably a better explanation, and the water in it is super salinated, where they actually use magnesium. I thought it was salt.
They don't use salt. They use magnesium.
I think magnesium dissolves to the point to where you can't even feel the grains of it. It's just purely in the water, and it gets it to where it's so dense that it's much like the Dead Sea. You're just sitting on top of it. And they make the water the temperature of your skin, or as close to it as they can. So then the idea being is you don't know where your body begins and ends in this water. So I did it, came back and talked to you guys about it, and the universal consensus was we all got to do this.
Let's do this.
That's right.
So we as a group, as a threesome of buddies, decided let's go do this thing, and we all had our individual chambers.
Thanks for clarifying.
And
people are thinking, were they stacked end to end or on top of each other like an ice cream sandwich? No, we each had our own tub.
And so we all had our individual float chambers, and we went and we floated. And the thing about floating is that you're in there for 90 minutes for your first session. And you can control whether there's light. The idea being that there's a door that shuts behind you, and you can either control to where it's near total darkness, or you can kind of adjust the light so it's kind of, you know, dim in there. And they also have music that you can either turn on or off or adjust the volume. But the idea being it's either supposed to be super relaxing or to the point to where you're doing a complete sensory deprivation and trying to get your brain to go into a deep sense of either self-reflection or relaxation or something to that effect. And we did it, and I kind of wanted to have us talk about our individual experiences with our float. I guess since I've started, I should just keep going.
Keep going. You're doing good.
With my part.
You know, the funny thing is, if anyone's recently seen the It movie, the remake of It, it just reminds me of the clown, you know, down here we all float.
So scary.
It's terrifying.
We all float down here.
So this was a lot more relaxing. No clowns involved.
No clowns, at least, you know, other than me.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Being in there. But for me, this time around, the second time for me, it was basically like super relaxing. Probably the most relaxed I've been in a long time. The feeling I had almost afterward was akin to getting a massage. That degree of kind of just overall like peace with yourself, wellness with yourself.
That's how I felt too afterwards. Like your muscles are so relaxed, you're almost like refreshed, almost like you woke up from a nap, and very much so like a massage. I'd say that's a good comparison.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you walk out of the place just kind of feeling like, almost like you've just finished a pretty long workout. Like I used to go on really long runs, and you once you get home, you shower, and you get out of the shower, it's just kind of like your whole body is just kind of drooping, and it's almost like a gel-like feeling on you. And but it was a very relaxing experience.
Felt like a stick of melted butter.
Yeah, I mean, euphoric is probably a word to use. I mean, you know, it was just super peaceful. This time around, the first time I did it, I did see some like red and some other type of like colors and flashes.
And this is in the dark.
This is in the dark, and at this time I didn't see. It was basically pitch black, and my eyes were closed this time around. So my eyes were closed, and I was seeing red flashes and maybe this hint of blue. The second time, no red, but I did have a little bit of a blue. And a white, I think, as well, kind of flashes, and they went away. And I did see what happens. The prevailing thought is the human brain, when you don't have any external stimulus, whether you don't hear anything, you don't see anything, and you're not feeling anything necessarily, the brain starts to turn in on itself. And instead of thinking about all the things that are happening outside of you, it starts kind of doing this almost like
making its own entertainment for yourself.
It's like a defrag for your brain is doing this thing. And so I did start to see what I would describe as they weren't legitimate like cohesive faces or things, but I could start seeing like shapes come together. But as soon as I started to be like, oh, I'm seeing, then it would kind of go away. So it was never anything really concrete as far as seeing something inside of my, you know, brain. But there were like definite like shapes shifting and just kind of that. But super relaxing. The funny part was you drift a little. And I think
oh gosh. It was, well, first of all, I don't know how anybody could write a negative review for one of these places because it's just so peaceful. It's like, what can you complain about? I mean, you're in there and it's cozy, it's relaxing, you get some peace and quiet. I mean, all in all, it's just good, regardless of if you have a life-changing vision or not. But we did drift a little, and it's a pretty big place. You know, the tub is pretty roomy. I mean, you could virtually stretch out your arms in each direction and barely touch the sides. Yeah. There was a good, foot or a foot and a half, from your toes to the end and from your head to the other end. Yeah. So it's spacious, but as much as I tried to lay still, completely, totally still, every few minutes I felt a little thunk. Bump. I was like, and then I'd be up against one of the walls, and I'd be thinking, how did I get over here? I didn't feel like I was moving, and then I'd readjust and I'd center myself, and then a couple minutes later, thunk, I'm on the other end, bumping elbows against the side. So it kind of kept me from getting into, playing guitar with Jimi Hendrix. Like I wanted to have like a deeply profound, like spiritual vision, but for me, I kept coming, back to my senses because I kept bumping up against the wall. But it was still really cool. And then, of course, when there's no visual or audio, stimulation, heck, there's not even any physical stimulation hardly in there, because that's the point of floating. But I kept having funny thoughts pop in my head, like, what if you fart and it creates some bubbles, and what if they hear you next door, and then
Exactly.
Like, what if I break wind and I hear Eddie and Pat chuckling next door because they can hear me?
Good push.
I say, hey guys, I have a hot tub going over here.
Well, there was one instance. One of the things they give you when you go into this place is you have a little squirt bottle with clean water, and the water is so salty, if you get it in your eyes, it starts to burn. So they give you this little towel and a spray bottle to clean out your eyes. And there was one time I had a little bead of water kind of drip down into my eye. So I reach over for the bottle and I spray my face and kind of wipe it off. And I go to put the stuff back, and of course it goes ka-thunk, and it's making all this noise. And I thought, oh man, I hope those guys don't hear this. And I probably I'm messing up their experience because I'm making so much noise. But you're actually in an environment where you're in this big box, basically, with a lid, and then that's inside a room, and then the other guys are in another room down the hallway.
There's like four layers.
So, I think we're pretty safe from disturbing other people when you're in the place. But I kind of went into it for almost kind of a vision quest sort of experience as well, which never really happened for me. But, it was a new environment. I was getting used to it. One thing, Eddie was talking about the colors and stuff. After I had been in there a while, I did start to see everything was completely dark. I had no music on whatsoever. And I did start to see like little, almost like sparkles. I'd catch them out of the corner of my eye. And I think that's exactly probably what was going on, is my brain is starting to kind of play tricks on me or process things. And that was the result of that. That's kind of what I chalked it up to that. Yeah. But no Jimi Hendrix tie-dye kaleidoscope type experiences for me.
Yeah. Here's a wish. I think with this, and it does sound like the typical sell, but I do believe this. I think the more you do something like this, the more your brain gets used to this as a thing, the more you can let go, and then kind of, you would potentially have a vision quest at some point. You just got to kind of stick with it. That's my thought, at least.
I agree. And I think for me, I might have put too much pressure on myself. Throughout the years, I've done a little bit of meditation here or there, and I've had some deeply profound experiences of seeing really cool spiritual things, and I think I put a lot of pressure on myself. Plus the 90 minutes kind of messed with me a little bit, because 10 minutes turned into 20 and 20 turned into 30, and I wasn't concentrating hard enough, and I kept thinking, okay, I got plenty of time still, plenty of time, I'm not quite there yet, plenty of time, and before you know it, I'm like, oh, there's not much time left, and I haven't really come to any profound realizations about the universe.
Yeah.
But I did have a vision of sorts, if you will. My wife Kenzie and my daughter Sky kind of crossed my mind, and at one point in time, I almost saw a vision of each one of them, and it was weird because it was like we were floating in space basically with no spacesuits on, and excuse me, and when we would our bodies would kind of drift into when we would perfectly line up with each other, when our hearts were perfectly horizontally aligned with each other, it was almost like a pulse or a flash of a loving feeling. So in other words, think of it like if you see these images of like a fighter pilot trying to lock onto a bogey and get him right in the target there. Mm-hmm. Like when I was perfectly aligned with my daughter and my wife, and our heart chakras, if you will, were aligned, it was like a surge of loving energy.
Oh, wow.
And then we'd kind of drift out of focus, and then we'd come back and I'd feel it again. That was really cool.
Yeah.
It was really neat.
That is awesome.
The other kind of thing that happened, and I don't know if it was like slipping into a past life scene or something like that, but I saw myself as a person, and it seemed like kind of Prohibition era, like 1920s maybe, and I was standing at like what I felt like was like the secret door of like a speakeasy or a nightclub.
Nice.
Where they slide the
almost like
thing
open.
Like
what's the password?
What's the password?
It's like a secret knock, and it was weird. And then two names popped in my head. God, for the life of me, I'm trying to think of them.
Muggsy and Knuckles.
Yeah, it was It was something weird.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like I can't remember. It was like Memphis. There was like a city, and then it was like a name. Anyway, I went home, and it felt like a jazz club to me. I went home. I Googled both names and jazz, and what came up was there was 2 different musicians with that last name that played at the same club at the same time. Once upon a time, and I don't know. Maybe there's no correlation. Maybe that's reaching. Maybe that's trying to put a square peg in a round hole, but. And as life gets busy and we have obligations and stuff, I haven't had time to dig any deeper, but there might be something there. I'm not sure. Both of them were jazz musicians. They played at the same club, and neither of the names were very common.
Do you know where the club was?
It was in the South. It was like Arkansas or Alabama or somewhere down there, which I don't know if that's exactly the jazz mecca, but anyway, it was interesting. And I don't know, again, perhaps a past life flashback, or my imagination just running wild, open to interpretation.
It's crazy, and I think like I said, the more you do this, the more those things might come to bear. Like you could actually maybe revisit that and be I don't know. It'd be fun to do this again.
Yeah,
that's my thing. The place we did it was called Simply Float.
Right.
And they're here in Omaha. I believe their Facebook page is like Float Omaha or something like that.
Well, the name of the place, just to clarify, it's not called Simply Float. The name is Float.
Yeah, Float. Yeah. I'm sorry.
It sounded like you were saying the name is Simply Float.
Sorry, my fault. It's quote unquote float.
Float.
But they're just for a placement thing. They're approximately at 156th and Dodge.
It's 597 North 155th Plaza in Omaha.
There you go.
Conveniently located right next to an awesome coffee shop. So when you're done playing guitar with Jimi Hendrix and slipping into past lifetimes, go next door and have a little latte and discuss your experience. That's what we did. At
aptly named Karma Coffee.
Perfect.
Might I add?
But it was a cool place. Pricing is, similar to what you would charge. They would charge for a massage. We thought maybe even a little cheaper than something like that.
Yeah.
But I thought it was definitely worth the money and a great experience.
I loved it. Like you said, it felt like a workout.
Yeah.
Afterwards, like almost a little bit of like just total muscle relaxing, and
without actually having to work out.
Exactly.
Or sweat.
Imagine a world. So check them out, but we had an absolute blast, and I can see us doing it again at some point.
Absolutely.
It's time for pop, culture, and the paranormal.
Welcome to segment 2, where we talk about pop culture phenomena related to the paranormal. We have an oldie but a goodie today, universally synonymous with the paranormal, and I think it's appropriate for the pop culture segment just because a lot of people have actually done it, usually at a slumber party. Ouija boards.
Oh boy.
There you go. Woo-hoo! The hardest word to spell in the paranormal realms, Ouija.
Yes. Weegee, I
that
believe.
Is correct.
Right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever done one?
I have.
Yeah?
I have. We, as kids, I think it was my sister had one. And we were probably preteen, maybe teenagers when she got it. We didn't spend a lot of time with it. Maybe, use it 2 or 3 times. Possibly it kind of freaked us out, the thought that, what are we getting ourselves into? I think
You're opening up a portal to hell.
Right. We don't want to do anything like that, so we're going to be careful with this.
Yeah.
But yeah, she just went out and bought one of the ones. I think it's, who was it? Parker Brothers or Hasbro or somebody produces them, and they sell them at Target. So
you get them right next to Monopoly.
Yeah.
Or
I'm a little old school. I actually made mine from the tombstone of a dead druid. So there's that. I just like to keep it real.
Yeah, there you go. Authentic.
Yeah, exactly.
It was christened at Stonehenge.
Exactly. I'm like a Ouija. What's the word? I'm dying now.
You're a truist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Elitist.
Purist.
I think it's hilarious though that they're made Milton Bradley or Parker Brothers. You can get it right there next to Jenga and Monopoly.
Yeah. Battleship, Barrel of Monkeys, Ouija.
Ants in your pants. Ouija board.
Don't break the ice.
Don't break the ice.
So yeah, I've used one too, and I'm not going to get into all the specifics, but there was enough going on that I was like, oh, there's some stuff, and it's difficult for people to be like, it's totally fake, man, it doesn't work, and I'm like, I have like direct hand experience, no pun intended, direct hand experience. Right. With it behaving in a way that's very hard for logical physics to explain what happened. So I'm convinced there's something going on with them. But yeah, enough for me to be like, I'll put it away.
Right.
I'll burn it in the holy fires. How about you, man?
Well, my career involves communicating with spirits, and I think technically you can do that without any kind of a board game at all. And mention making your own. Anybody could make their own. Get out a sheet of paper, draw letters out, get yourself a little, what do you call that? The little moving piece.
A planchette.
Yeah, there you are. You are an expert.
Not that I make them.
Planchette, word of the week. So I think your intentions are more important than the board itself. Mm-hmm. In other words, that you could sit around without a board, and if you want to conjure up some spirits and communicate, you probably could.
Yeah.
My wife and I just kind of on a whim. I don't even remember why. I think this was pre-child, so we were probably just sitting around on a Thursday night board.
Yep.
Decided to go to Target and get one.
Yeah. Pun intended, right?
Pun intended. Yeah. And we just sit down and did it. And I was kind of maybe we didn't have nothing happened. But maybe it was probably because I was sitting there sulking because I just really didn't feel like doing it.
You just sat there stagnant and didn't move?
Yeah, it just sat. It literally didn't move.
Huh.
But it was probably because like I was sitting there like with my hand on my chin and I was just like pushing it down into. I was pushing on it so hard. I'm like, even if a spirit's trying to communicate, move this, jerks.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it was kind of like one of those things where I just didn't feel like communicating with spirits. I do that at the office for my work, and it's like making coffee all day and then coming home and your wife says, hey, do you want to make some coffee? And it's like, no, not really.
Exactly.
But, I have heard so many freakish horror stories from people who claim that they've had really bizarre experiences with Ouija boards. The classic horror, scary movie kind of deal where like it burst into flames.
Whoa! I don't know about the flames.
Or we threw it away and then the next morning it was back on the kitchen table, that kind of stuff. And so we've only used it that one time. I have no interest in using it. Not because I'm afraid. I don't feel like using it again.
Yeah.
And I cannot bring myself to throw it away.
Oh.
Because I'm afraid of it ending back up in my house.
Improperly dispose of the Ouija board.
I don't want to give it away at a garage sale and then like have it, reappear in my front steps the next day.
You rip it in half. It's on your chest. You wake
yeah,
up.
exactly. So it's kind of one of those things. I think a lot of people have tried it, usually at a slumber party, usually preteen. What was your experience? Do you remember what happened, Eddie? Was it moving around spelling things, or was it just odd, or what happened with your experience?
The thing that convinced me that it was really working?
Yeah.
I'll share it. I'll be transparent. Oh boy.
Here we go.
So I won't use names.
Okay.
Because I'm already indemnified. But there were two other people there whom I trust implicitly, like with my absolute life.
Okay.
Like, so there's no question here. Like, well, maybe they were messing around. They weren't. The understanding was I had never had an experience with this thing, and I wanted to kind of just see whether it was legitimate or not. That was really my only real take. I was coming in as more or less kind of a skeptic. Not like, this is fake, but I just wanted to see what would happen.
Sure.
So we sit down, completely, more or less, my needle's right in the middle. Like, show me. Let's do this.
Right.
So we did. And it's not like, and if you guys have used this, and anyone watching or listening, if you've used this, it's not like you have to like do some weird ritual or anything. You just kind of start talking.
Right.
Open yourself up to this idea that you're going to be communicating with something or someone you can't see. So we do. And the thing begins to move around. And the funny thing about it is, and it's very easy to be like, so you guys were subconsciously doing it, all this stuff. That's fine. The way it was moving felt very much like it was moving independent.
Sure.
Like, there wasn't one particular person. Because, I mean, if all three of us had our hands on this computer and me and Pat were passively holding it and you started to pull it away, we could feel the force.
You would feel the direction.
Coming from you.
And you'd say, oh, that's Joe, that's pulling it, or whatever. That's Billy, that's it's coming from the right side, so we know that guy's doing it.
Exactly. And I'm doing all this in my head. Like, okay, let's start breaking this down, like, science-wise.
Right.
I mean, the job that most of mine and Pat's jobs are highly technical jobs. So we kind of live in a world where we're like, we kind of figure things out as we go along. So I'm already trying to access data. Like, okay, I can feel this thing there's no, like, direct point of force here. It feels like it's almost moving by itself.
And your fingers are just along for the ride.
Completely, just barely touching the dang thing. And it's not like you see anyone specifically, like, having enough contact to be able to dictate where this thing moves around. It's basically barely being touched. But that wasn't, I mean, yeah, so this thing is spelling out things. I mean, all sorts of responses to answers, making claims of what we're talking to and where it came from or when it came from. And I think there was even a mention of, like, ancient Egypt at one point in time from one of these things that we got a hold of. But the thing that, even through all of this, I'm still kind of in this zone of, like, I don't have really any, we're not necessarily moving this on purpose, but I know there's a psychological phenomenon where you're moving it and not aware that you're moving it. There's this other thing.
So you're still not thoroughly convinced.
This is where I get convinced. So the thing is shaped kind of like this for people, like an
a
arrow.
triangle.
Yeah, like an arrow. Like a pointer on your computer.
Yeah.
And it's pointing, like, let's say it's it's more like this. It was a triangle of people, and it's pointing towards the person directly across from me. And so one of the people at the table was female. It was two dudes and a lady. And I go, okay, one of us is female, and in this case, she was right next to me right here. Mm-hmm. And I go, treating this thing like a pointer, point it to whoever's female.
Okay.
This thing, so my buddy's holding it with his fingers. I have my fingers on it. She has her fingers on it. The thing starts to rotate, and it pivots on an orbit, and it pulls away from my buddy's fingers. So he's not even holding it. Because of the angle she was at, it gets away from her fingers. And so I'm the only one touching it, and I have two little fingers on a corner.
And you weren't moving it.
I'm not doing this. I'm literally barely touching it. And at one point, I had to, like, keep up with it, like, so I could maintain.
So it was so awkward that you couldn't even move it that way.
I was having to pivot my shoulder to keep in contact with it, and it was rotating, and then it literally kind of stopped, and then did another little, like, mini adjustment, like, for good measure, to make sure it was pointing at this person.
Wow.
And then it just stopped moving. And it was one of those things that it's not like, but it was, like, enough for me that I'm like, I don't have any context to, like say anything other than this thing just rotated on its own.
Right.
And is pointing at this person. And at that point, we all decided to kind of put it away.
Yeah.
They call it a night. And we did.
It's like, paid your money, had some fun. Okay, let's put it away before anything scary happens.
Well, the big question is ultimately, like, what are you hoping to get out of it?
So when you were the one who basically had your two fingers on it.
Mm-hmm. The only way I could have possibly done that.
Were you consciously, like, even letting up on your pressure or adjusting how you were touching it?
I was constantly making sure that I barely maintained contact. You know what I mean? Uh-huh. Like, enough to say I was touching it. Like, me being like, I'm touching
so you could feel it under your fingertips.
Right. But never enough to, like, apply direct pressure. Enough to say I had contact, but not that I was actually trying to manipulate it in any way. So that was my context. The buddy of mine, same exact situation. He's like, I've never done this. I kind of want to see whether it works or not. So for him, it was like he was in the same boat. And for the woman who was with us, she had done it several times, but was kind of in the mindset like, this is gonna work because I've seen it work. And she swore off of these things. She's like, I just don't like doing them anymore, but because, you want to do this, let's just do this.
Let's do it.
But when we're done, I don't want to do this anymore. And it was and that was kind of the big tell. Was like, hey, it rotated and pointed to you. Let's call it a night.
See, I think it's that kind of experience why we didn't spend a lot of time with this thing. We just kind of freaked each other out, I think. And well, like I said, we used it maybe once or twice.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember anything that we covered with it or if it answered any of our questions. But eventually it just kind of put on the shelf and forgot about it.
What I see happening with these things, and this is just my opinion, so take it for what it's worth, but what I see happening, and it kind of happened to me a little bit, because it was so pardon the pun, out of this world. It was so different that I kind of wanted to do it again.
Right. Just because it was a thrill. It was
Right.
a rush.
And then I found out I wanted to do it again. And then again. And then again. And I'm like, this... Because you feel like...
Did you get to the point where you were doing it by yourself?
Almost.
Yeah.
Considering it.
Yeah.
And And then I was a big, don't do it alone, don't do it alone. I'm like, what is this? But what I realized is, even if this is not about... And I just don't... As a person, I don't believe in, like, demons. It's just not my thing. I just don't buy it.
Right.
I think there's a lot of things out there and a lot of explanations, but I don't believe in that as a thing.
If it makes you feel better, I'm on the same page with you. I just don't. I know some people do, but I don't.
Yeah.
I see some people.
Right.
I think living people are scarier than deceased ones, in my opinion.
That's my point.
Yeah.
If there's evil out there, we've made it.
Yeah, exactly.
but the point is, for me, it wasn't so much about like ripping open a portal to hell. It was more about, it was almost in a way a kind of drug. Like, if you're not careful, this could warp your sense of reality. And it's like, well, why would I talk to real people when I could talk to people who have infinite... And it's like, what I realized is you may be getting cohesive answers, but they still don't make sense.
Right.
There's nothing that's really, like, useful you would get out of this.
Sure.
And that was my big takeaway, was like, at its most bad, is it could pull you away from your real life. It could pull you away from your friends and family. And that was one thing that the lady I spoke with, that was her opinion of it, was like, this thing can confuse you on what's actually worth spending time on.
You know, and I talk with a lot of people on a weekly basis who are really interested in, you know, getting validation and signs and messages from their deceased loved ones, you know, and just in terms of like, okay, a cardinal landed on my deck. I find, you know, meaning in that because, you know, let's say, you know, grandma loved cardinals and it's the anniversary of her death today, and then a cardinal shows up, or, you know, just things like that, like things that people interpret as messages from heaven. And that's great. It's fun. It's validating and comforting, and I think truly people in the afterlife can use physical objects like that to grab our attention and give us a little how do you do. The only danger, like you said, Eddie, comes in. I have met a couple people over the years who do become so obsessed with getting signs and messages and validation and communicating with the afterlife, they almost run the risk of losing touch with reality of, okay, I'm still on earth, I'm in this world, I have to pay my bills and go to work, and okay, not everything is a sign or a message from the afterlife. I had a lady a few years back, honest to God, she asked me, and I felt bad for her. I didn't make fun of her. I felt kind of sorry for her. She said, okay, Andy, I have a lot of spiders all over my house. You know, what do you think that means? Is there a loved one that's trying to tell me something? Is it a guardian angel trying to get a message across? And I said, I think what it means is you have a spider problem and you need to call pest control. You know, some things just happen because they happen in this world. And it's okay to try to contact the spirit world for a couple nuggets of wisdom or a little bit of comfort or validation. But at the end of the day, you have to keep 2 feet on the ground and realize that we're still rooted in this earth. You know,
you have to live your life.
Have to live your life.
Yeah. So Ouija boards, I'm convinced they have some sort of ability, but I don't know necessarily what it is, and I'm not overly concerned about figuring it out either.
And my take on it is whether you're trying to contact the spirit world by just, you know, through Ouija boards or other means, it's all about intention. And what I've noticed is that like attracts like. You know, in other words, if you're a kind person, a good person with good energy, whoever you contact from the spirit world is probably going to be positive. Mm-hmm. If you're a negative person who exudes bad energy and you go seeking out a spirit, well, you might attract one that's kind of grumpy or kind of draining or kind of negative.
Right.
That's just how it is in life, too. Have you ever noticed that mean people tend to hang out with mean people? Nice people tend to have nice friends.
That's true.
And I think it's just like a magnetic thing. So, anyway, be careful. You know, if you're going to be using a Ouija board, make sure that you're trying to contact nice, pleasant spirits. And on a lighter note,
I agree.
I can almost picture like, you know, if the three of us are doing a Ouija board sometimes and I'm hungry, it's like, okay, spirit world, what should we eat? You know, exactly. P-I-Z-Z-A. Okay, Eddie, go get me a pizza.
Exactly.
I swear I didn't move it. What do you mean?
I'm all like, I wanted Cinnabon. The Ouija board always says pizza.
Anyway, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Pop culture, Ouija boards.
And now it's time for the main mystery.
And once again, we've come to the main mystery. This week we're talking about the Phoenix Lights.
Man.
Something we haven't talked a lot about anyway, are UFOs. And the Phoenix Lights is all about UFOs and strange lights that happened in Phoenix in the late 1990s. And so you guys are familiar with Phoenix Lights, what they're all about.
I mean, thousands of people saw this, didn't they?
Thousands of people.
Yeah, no.
It just came up on the 20th anniversary, I think, this year.
Recently, yeah, because it was 1997.
Yeah.
Blew my mind.
When this all went down. But, yeah, I've heard anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 people have come forward and said, yeah, I saw it. It happened. This is real. But what happened, it all kind of went down on the night of March 13th, 1997, and it happened between 8 and 10:30 p.m. in Phoenix, Arizona. An estimated 10,000 witnesses reported seeing a large V-shaped craft, which some people estimated to be over a mile across, with approximately, I think it's 5 or 6 lights, depending on who you talk to on it. But it traveled silently over the city at very low altitude. And some people were actually directly under this thing as it came over their house. And they said it seemed like it was so low you could almost reach up and touch it. So it was a very low altitude. And it went through an area of Sky Harbor Airport, which is the airport in Phoenix. So it was restricted airspace. You got to be in the flight pattern to come flying through there, and it flew right through it.
Did anything show up on radar?
They had witnesses from the airport. People actually called the airport and talked to air traffic controllers. They say, we can see it with our binoculars, but there is nothing on radar. So they actually have air traffic control guys came forward and said, yeah, we saw it too.
Yeah.
We don't know what it was. We don't know why it was there. And it was not on the radar.
Well, and the weird thing is you think of other aircraft like the U-2 spy plane or the SR-71 Blackbird, things that fly so high and so fast that they don't show up on radar.
Right.
This thing was low and slow.
And
it was low and huge.
It was low and slow and huge. And, the closest thing people can compare it to is the B-2 stealth bomber.
It's like a big boomer. It's
and
like
it looks like a big bat wing kind of thing. But that thing, if you've ever seen one fly over, which I have, they are not quiet.
Yeah.
They are not really slow. I mean, they gotta keep a momentum going to keep themselves in the air. And they were saying this thing was, they were saying this thing was going like really slow, like crawling across the sky.
Now I'm serious here. Was this Batman? Are we not sure it wasn't Batman?
But they had one witness who was actually in the military, and he's very familiar with the B-2 stealth bomber, and he said, you probably could have landed a B-2 on this thing. It was so big. It was like a mile wide.
And from a distance, you see the footage that people captured up in the mountains just outside of Phoenix. And you're right, it's like 5 or 6 or 7 lights that form a V formation. But up close, the people who were right beneath it as it flew overhead said it was solid. It wasn't just separate. It wasn't just lights that were not connected. There was a solid mass to it. And people reported it blocked out the stars in the sky. So whatever this was, it was a physical object,
They've also reported a couple of different orbs trailing. Some witnesses said there were orbs trailing it. And the military has come out and said, well, this whole thing, it was flares. It was us. We were shooting off flares that night. We were dropping flares. Well, with flares, when you see a flare coming down in the sky, you see smoke. You see them kind of waving around.
Yeah.
And everybody that they talk to says these things, they did not project any light out. There wasn't a beam of light coming out of it. It was just like a solid ball of light, but it was all self-contained. It wasn't really illuminating anything around it. There was no smoke that, a lot of the people who are familiar with flares, they say if it's a flare, you're going to see the smoke in the light. It's kind of come down to a thing where a lot of people think it's a big cover-up, government cover-up. The real strange thing about this thing that I've learned was the day afterwards, the governor came and gave a press conference and said, "We know what it was. We're going to have this press conference. Come on down. I'll tell you all about it." And so the press shows up and says, "We know what caused the Phoenix Lights." And then they walk some guy out dressed in an alien costume. Just a real cheesy looking alien costume.
I remember that.
This, we have captured the culprit. This is who is responsible for the alien lights. And so people are kind of laughing about it, and so many people were outraged.
Yeah, job well
that.
done, dude. Yeah. No, I'm just like, he was told to do that.
Yeah, and it was almost like the government came forth and said, "Okay, you're going to go out there and you're going to say this, and that'll be the
Make
end."
it look stupid.
Poo-poo it, like make it's just a goof. It's not just like totally making fun of it.
Let's delegitimize 10,000 people's different eyewitness accounts of this gigantic thing.
But then he kind of changed his tune, didn't he, Pat?
No.
Oh.
The strange thing about this is the very same person years later comes out and says, I saw him that night. I went out. He actually slipped his detail, his state patrol detail, kind of ditched him and went out just so he could go see him for himself.
Right.
And he has gone on the record and says he doesn't believe it was of this earth. He saw what was going on.
Did he explain why he decided to poo-poo it? Just because was he told to do that, or did he decide to have a little fun?
I don't. I know he's come back and he said he's regretted it.
He's recanted.
Making light of it because
I don't know if he ever came out and said,
"I forgive you."
But so it's kind of weird that he would change his tune, and he's a pretty public figure.
Yeah.
You've even got Kurt Russell.
Yes.
He saw it.
He saw it too.
Kurt
He was
Russell
in the area?
Said that he revealed on a TV show fairly recently. He was actually doing a show to promote Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2.
Yes.
And he was on a BBC show in England, and there was a report that night of an unidentified pilot who was flying his private aircraft with his son near the airport in Phoenix, and he radioed the tower and said, "What is this thing?" And the tower came back and said, "We don't have anything on radar.
Yeah.
There's nothing there." And he said the weird thing about it is he just kind of dropped it at that, landed his plane, and him and his son really didn't talk about it. And they walked away and didn't really speak of it again until like a few years later. He came home, and his son is actually kind of like his stepson or kind of his adopted son. It's actually Goldie Hawn's son.
Oh yeah,
who kind of looks at him as a father figure. But one day they came home and Goldie Hawn is sitting on the couch watching a show about the Phoenix Lights, and they were talking about this pilot who radioed in, and and it kind of occurred to him, I think that was me.
Yeah.
And so he goes and he checks his logbook, and sure enough, it was the same date, same time that all this was going on.
Wow,
and so he kind of realized that, I was the guy who radioed this in. And that's one of the things that has been reported by a number of witnesses is almost kind of a lack of concern after the event. Like people just kind of blew it off. They just kind of put it out of their mind, almost like they were
like Men in Blacked. Like
like it was erased from their mind almost. You know? So that's kind of weird. But for him to come out and go public with something like that makes you wonder if there's something to the story.
Plus, he's Star-Lord's dad. Spoiler alert, by the way. Sorry. What do you think, Andy?
I remember watching there's been several documentaries that have been made about it after the fact, and I remember watching one. It was visual. It was a guy who analyzes visual footage. That's his job. That's what he does. And I think it was like a private contractor, so he doesn't work for the military or anything like that. But he was trying to debunk the military, saying that this was flares that were dropped out of a military airplane. And this guy is flat out angry during this interview. He says there is no way on God's green earth that was flares. And he almost made it sound like the people who suggested this were complete idiots. He did a side-by-side comparison. He had 2 TV screens up, and what he was showing was a side-by-side comparison of a flare compared to a constant light source, such as a light bulb or something like. Because if you were to put a really sensitive camera, like let's say on your light bulb over there, Eddie, and if you crunch the data and you study the lumens and the luminosity of it, if there's a light source other than a flare, it's steady and it's constant. In other words, the brightness does not vary. It doesn't get brighter. It doesn't get dimmer. It's a constant steadiness. And he showed flares. Flares are the exact opposite. Flares kind of pulsate. They flicker. They get brighter. They get dimmer. And eventually they just go out altogether.
Right.
And he showed basically like a line graph. And when you have a constant light source, such as a light bulb, the line is completely steady. It's just a straight, flat, horizontal line. And he showed the flare, and the luminosity of the flare was going up and down so much that what you have, it almost looks like a EKG, you know, where the lines, like a heart meter, where the line's up and down and all over the place.
Right.
And the footage that they have from that night, the video footage, he put it into this system, and guess what? It's completely flat.
Yeah.
Meaning it was not a flare. It was a light source that was constant and steady the entire time. It didn't waver once.
Yeah.
So he completely disproved the flare theory.
Nice.
Another thing with flares is they have a finite amount of time that they're going to be burning.
Right.
They're going to be falling to the ground, they're going to hit the ground, or they're going to blow out, they're going to weaken. And one guy said he watched this thing with a telescope for a good 20 minutes.
Right.
A flare's not going to be up there for 20 minutes.
No.
So,
Plus, there's a giant mile-long triangle flying in the sky.
Right.
Like, what? This is the part that really gets me about, and this is where I'm going to sound like a big, a conspiracy theory tinfoil hat guy. But it's just Joe Rogan, one of his big things is, but there is conspiracies. We know that. Like, conspiracy is just something when a group tries to hide something from another group. Right. And that's happened all throughout human history. So to say that there's no such thing as that is silly, because that's committed all the time, whether it's in large religious secret things, or if it's a governmental thing. There's things happening that they just don't want you to know. There's that. But that being said, the notion that what they do is they don't try to address the people who take a story and have a guy in an alien suit the next day. What they do is they don't try to take the whole story at once, because if they did, they couldn't do it. They pick it apart piece by piece, like, well, these are flares and this is that and this is that, so it was nothing. But they ignore the larger problem that 10,000 people saw a mile-long thing flying low and slow in the sky, and it wasn't showing up on radar. Kurt Russell's calling it out. He's Snake Plissken. You don't mess around with Kurt Russell. And it just shocks me to no end that we don't. And we talked about this on another episode that, especially in America, we seem to just kind of want to get back to business as usual and not really dial in on this stuff.
Yeah.
Where does something that big go? Where did it go? Did they see?
That's another thing about this. It was sighted in Nevada, in places in Nevada. And then it moved into Arizona and over Phoenix, down to Tucson. And there were even reports of it all the way down into Mexico.
Oh,
Did it have to go through customs?
So do flares cover that distance?
No.
I don't think they do,
That's funny.
So,
but they didn't did it
did
fly
it
out of
jet
sight?
off then all of a sudden, or did it
just fade
I
away?
thought I saw one reference, somebody talking about how it did eventually just kind of speed off, like fast, really quick.
Like the Millennium Falcon, just put it into overdrive and you're gone.
Yeah, and it
Punch
was
it,
gone.
Chewie.
And
Punch it, Chewie.
but again, they said there was no noise. It was silent. It just kind of took off and it was gone. So it's almost like it was making an appearance.
It's like it wanted
just
to
to
be
say,
seen.
I'm here.
It's like
And-
a guy
and then they're
rolling in a parade in his Cadillac, waving like, "Yeah, look at me.
Yeah.
I want you to look at me. I'm here. Look at me. I'm hot stuff."
Or those kids in those small Nebraska towns who go cruising.
Yeah. But here's the thing: it was low and slow.
Yeah.
Kind of like I cook a pork butt in a crock pot. Cook it low and slow. That's how this thing was operating. But the thing is, it was going too slow. Okay, it wasn't a U-2 spy plane. It wasn't an SR-71 Blackbird. It wasn't a stealth this or stealth that. This thing was going slow. And, even those stealths, they can't be detected by radar, but they're not whisper quiet. They still make noise. This thing was dead silent. And like you said, it was low enough, people felt like they could practically reach up and touch it. So you're talking about some sort of propulsion system that is beyond what we can grasp right now. The airplanes, the aircraft that we have are things that have to move at a fast speed, or else they fall to the ground.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why planes have jet engines. So whatever this is, it's you get in the territory of anti-gravity machines, or I don't know. It boggles the mind, and so that's why when people say it did not appear to be of this earth, you have to truly consider that.
And to your point, Eddie, where you were talking about 10,000 people come out and said they saw this thing.
Right.
You also had police officers, people you generally would trust. Well,
Yeah,
depending on who you are.
but they're trained to be good observers.
Yeah.
Right.
They say they saw it. People from the military say they saw it.
Right.
A 911 operator said the phone just lit up.
Right.
Of people calling her. And then the next day, she went in to look at some of the records about what was going on, and they had vanished. And she's like, "Oh, here we go already,"
So the Men in Black did arrive.
So yeah,
And Kurt Russell. Sorry, I'm just going to leave that.
there were physicians that said they saw it. Just people from all walks of life saw this thing. It's not like it was a couple of guys out camping in the desert,
Right.
by themselves.
Billy Bob
Say,
after a six-pack
Right,
saying, "I
right.
done seen it. It was
I
right
saw
up there."
it. It was in the sky. It tried to pick me up. It was
It stole my wife. She's gone.
it was well observed by a lot of different people. So
What I love about it is we're willing to give like governmental groups way more trust than we give like individuals. If I called you guys and I'm like, "Hey guys, come over. Or you heard Shireen be like, "Hey, there's a chocolate cake at our house. Come and get some, guys." And you come over and I'm sitting next to a plate that has a bunch of chocolate crumbs and I got frosting on my lips and it's gone. And you guys are like, "Did you eat the cake?" I'm like, "There never was a cake, guys. No cake at all. What are you talking about?" You know what I mean? It's like just this utter, and you would be like, "You ate the cake, dude. You ate the cake. Your wife said there was a cake. There's obvious evidence." I'd be like, "What are you talking about? You're delusional." It's like, but when we hear it from the government or other people, we're like, "Well, I guess the record just got erased. It makes sense, right?" It blows my mind. I want to flip a
It
table.
maddens you.
Not this table. It's crazy.
Yeah.
We should demand more out of that. Like, I feel like
I agree.
it's such an interesting, and I mean, frankly, if there is a civilization capable of making anything that big fly quietly, then they could easily just go like boop and pew.
Yeah.
So they're clearly nice.
Yeah, they're
Or at least
clearly nice, 'cause
neutral.
if they wanted to destroy us, they would have already.
Right.
And here's my take. I think maybe for some people, there's just not a compartment in their brain for this to make sense.
That's terrifying.
Some people don't want to explain because I think the thought of life being out there on other planets, about us not being the only ones, that makes them feel less special, that makes them perhaps question their higher power or what we've been taught through religion, and they just can't process it. And so what do Monday morning? They shrug, they toss their paper aside, they go to work, they punch the time clock, and they do what they always do.
And that's the danger to the other side of the Ouija board argument, is like to overly focus on the bills got to get paid and stuff like that. Then you're missing out on some of the more remarkable things that are happening around us. It's a nice little balance there, I guess.
And the thing that makes you wonder is, what's it going to take for people to believe that some of this stuff is real?
Right.
You're going to have an alien land in the middle of Times Square,
Right.
walk out, shake people's hands, But not only there, it's also going to have to land in Los Angeles. It's going to have to land in Australia. It's going to have to land all over the place for people to actually believe this.
Yeah.
Because they'll say, oh, that was all CG. It's
Right.
not real.
It's a viral thing. It's for a movie.
The burden of proof is always on the person who claims to have experienced it. And, well, what about the person who's denying it? Where's their responsibility in all this?
I mean, kudos to people for not being that easily fooled. But on the same token, it's also worth noting that maybe you need to open up the old brain pan a bit and look at things a little bit differently. And I don't know.
Well, and you talk math and statistics and probability. The likelihood of there being intelligent life out there, it is a virtual certainty.
You're right.
That there's not just a couple, that there's millions or, even billions of civilizations out there. And, look how far that human beings have come with our technology in just 100 years or so.
Right.
We went from making automobiles to being on the moon in less than a century. And so you extrapolate that, what are we going to do the next 100 years or the next 1,000 or the next million? And cosmically, 1,000,000 years is nothing. That's like a second. That goes by like that.
Right.
So if there's a civilization that can increase their technology at the rate that we're doing, and B, not blow themselves up in the process, imagine how advanced a civilization would be if they're 10 million or 100 million years more advanced than us. Their technology would be like magic. Like, forget even being advanced. It would be like magic to us.
Well,
and I think, flying a mile-long boomerang-shaped craft to another world, it would be like, that'd be like high school kids could be steering that thing for all we know. That's a high school experiment.
They're
That's
out
nothing.
on a joyride.
They're out on a joyride.
Yeah.
They probably hijacked it and stole and warped dimensions, and then they got back home and their parents grounded them.
Yeah.
Because it's child's play. To us, it's so technologically advanced, we don't even have a place in our brain to process it, and for them, it's just a Tuesday. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're in trouble, Beeble Brox. Our insurance doesn't cover going to Earth.
You took that 30 light years away. I told you to stay within our cosmic neighborhood.
You're done. Kurt Russell saw you, for Pete's sakes.
Don't forget your towel.
Don't forget your time. Yes, Hitchhiker's Guide. That's something else. I'd love to hear people's comments and thoughts on this. On our Facebook page.
Maybe if there's anyone that listens to us from the Phoenix area, maybe you have a relative or a cousin who, saw it or experienced something from that event. We'd love to hear some follow up from that. But it's actually kind of a hotbed from around the country. The Southwest down there in the Phoenix area. A lot of weird things have been seen. Nothing of the caliber of the Phoenix lights before or since then, but. Yeah, you go out there to Sedona, Arizona, and some places like that. People regularly see them. Hell, there's like tours you can sign up for, and you're virtually guaranteed to see some weird lights in the sky. But then you're down there near Area 51 and Roswell and all that jazz too.
Yes. Over one of the most populous cities in the world, by the way, like Phoenix. Like, it was not a oops, where are we? Like, that was a definite look at us kind of thing.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So I guess that kind of wraps up this episode. We're getting pretty close
we're getting towards the end of the old trail.
But like Andy said, if you want to get in touch with us, send us a message, paranormaldads@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
We now have our very own URL. It's www.paranormaldads.com. That'll take you to our Podbean page, and you'll be able to listen to all our shows there. We're on Facebook at Paranormal Dads, and also on Twitter at Paranormal Dads.
I love it.
Keep your eyes to the sky, people.
And also, please be sure to follow all of our sound effects are brought to you by freesound.org. Check them out, please. And for all your sound effect needs, check them out.
All right.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.